This is the story of how Elvis Presley, the most famous man in the world, met a 14-year-old girl at a house party in West Germany in 1959, and how her parents not only knew about it, but gave their blessing for the relationship to continue. What followed was an 8-year courtship that produced one of the most unusual love stories in American history, and understanding it requires understanding exactly where Elvis was in his life when it began. By December of 1957, Elvis had done something no musician before him had managed so completely. He had changed American culture. The records were selling in numbers RCA could barely track, the movies were drawing millions, and his face appeared on more merchandise than almost any living person on Earth. And then the U.S. Army sent him a letter. The draft notice arrived right in the middle of all of it, and the question of what Elvis would do became a national conversation. Colonel Parker, his manager, understood immediately that this moment could break the career or cement it, and he advised Elvis to serve with no exceptions and no special services arrangements where famous soldiers got to entertain the troops instead of doing actual army work. Elvis took that advice further than Parker probably expected. Paramount Pictures had already sunk up to $350,000 in pre-production costs on King Creole, so Elvis personally wrote to the Memphis Draft Board requesting a deferment until filming wrapped. The board granted it. But the moment that film finished, March 24, 1958, Elvis Presley reported for induction, received his serial number, 533-10761, and became a private. The Army offered him a spot in special services anyway, the standard arrangement for famous inductees, performing for other soldiers rather than living as one. He turned it down flat. His explanation, delivered at a press conference before he shipped overseas, was direct. People were waiting for him to crack, expecting the star treatment to show through, and he was determined to prove them wrong, not only to them, but to himself. He served as a regular soldier and eventually as a jeep driver for commanding officers. That stubbornness cost him in ways nobody could have predicted. While Elvis was at Fort Hood for basic training, his mother, Gladys, fell gravely ill. The Army granted emergency leave, and Elvis rushed home. But Gladys Presley died on August 14, 1958, at the age of 46. She had been the most central person in his life since childhood, and her death hollowed him out in ways he never fully recovered from. A month later, still carrying that grief, he shipped to Friedberg, West Germany, assigned to the 1st Medium Tank Battalion, 32nd Armored Regiment, 3rd Armored Division. He lived off base in a rented house at Goethestrasse 14 in Bad Nauheim, and that house is where everything else in this story begins. Germany is also where a sergeant introduced him to amphetamines during field maneuvers, and by multiple biographical accounts, Elvis became, in the words of those who knew him then, practically evangelical about what they did for him. That introduction, documented by biographer Peter Guralnick and others, marks the beginning of a chemical dependency that would track him for the rest of his life. None of that was visible from the outside. From the outside, Elvis Presley was simply doing his duty. On September 13, 1959, an airman named Curry Grant brought a group of people to a party at that house in Bad Nauheim. Among them was Priscilla Beaulieu, the stepdaughter of U.S. Air Force Captain Joseph Paul Beaulieu, stationed in Wiesbaden. Priscilla had been born Priscilla Ann Wagner on May 24, 1945. Elvis was 24 years old.
Grant introduced them, and by Priscilla's own account, what struck her almost immediately was not the fame, but something more unexpected. Elvis started talking about his mother. Gladys had been dead barely a year, and the grief was still raw, and he shared it with this teenager he had just met in a way that apparently neither of them quite anticipated. He kissed her goodbye that night, and by her account it was her first real kiss. What followed was not a fleeting encounter. Elvis kept inviting her back, and she kept coming, and eventually her father found out that his 14-year-old stepdaughter had been spending time at Elvis Presley's house. Captain Beaulieu's response was to demand a meeting in person, and Elvis arrived for it in uniform with his father, Vernon, beside him. The parents set conditions. Transportation would be arranged and accounted for. Curfews would be respected and enforced, and the visits would continue only under those terms. And they did. For the remaining months of Elvis's German assignment, Priscilla Beaulieu remained part of his life with her family's conditional approval in place. On March 2, 1960, Elvis left Germany. Priscilla stood at Rhine-Main Airport and watched him go. By her account, she isolated herself for 2 days afterward, unable to eat or sleep in any normal way. She was 14 years old and had just watched the most famous person she had ever met board a plane back to a life that had almost nothing to do with hers. Elvis's military discharge was finalized on March 5th at Fort Dix, New Jersey, where Nancy Sinatra presented him with a gift on behalf of her father. His flight home had stopped to refuel at Prestwick Airport in Scotland, making that the only time in his entire life that Elvis Presley set foot on soil outside of Germany during those years, and even then he never actually left the airport or legally entered the United Kingdom. Back in America, the career restarted with full force, and running underneath all of it, maintained by phone calls and letters across the Atlantic, was this ongoing connection to a teenage girl living on a U.S. Air Force base in West Germany. For 3 years, that's what it was, long distance. Elvis in Memphis and Hollywood and Las Vegas, Priscilla in Germany, and then moving through the American school system as her family relocated. The contact continued, and both of them kept it going. In the summer of 1963, at Elvis's invitation, Priscilla Beaulieu moved to Memphis. She was 17 years old. Her parents gave what has been described as their reluctant approval, and she enrolled at Immaculate Conception High School, where she eventually graduated. She lived at Graceland under conditions that Elvis and Colonel Parker had negotiated with the Beaulieus, the specifics of which were not made fully public. Priscilla's own memoir addresses what life at Graceland looked like during those years, including the fact that Elvis introduced her to amphetamines and sleeping pills as a way of matching his schedule, which ran through the night and slept through the morning. The relationship that had started at a house party in Bad Nauheim when she was 14 continued through her high school years in Memphis and through the years when Elvis was simultaneously one of the most recognized faces on Earth. On May 1, 1967, 8 years from that first meeting at that party in West Germany, Elvis Presley and Priscilla Beaulieu married at the Aladdin Hotel in Las Vegas. She was 21 years old. He was 32. Lisa Marie Presley arrived the following year. The marriage lasted 5 years before the separation that began in February of 1972. The divorce was finalized in October of 1973. Priscilla left for Mike Stone, a karate instructor, which carries its own particular irony, given that Elvis had spent years incorporating martial arts into his daily life and had been the one to encourage Priscilla to take up karate in the first place. By most accounts, the divorce hit Elvis harder than almost anything else in his professional life had, and it coincided with a period of accelerating decline in his health and his relationship with the prescription drugs that had entered his life back in those German barracks in 1958. The story of Elvis and Priscilla is often told as a romance, and parts of it clearly were. But it is also a story about how extraordinary circumstances, a young man at the absolute peak of global fame living on an army base in West Germany, an Air Force captain's teenage stepdaughter at a house party in Bad Nauheim, produced a relationship that neither the people in it nor the people around them had any real framework for understanding at the time. 8 years from that first meeting to the wedding, 5 more years to the divorce, and a daughter who would carry both of them forward long after Elvis died at Graceland on August 16, 1977, at the age of 42. Priscilla Presley outlived him by decades and became one of the most effective stewards of his legacy, overseeing Graceland's development as a museum and cultural landmark. The 14-year-old girl from the party in Bad Nauheim became, in some ways, the person most responsible for how the world remembers him. That's the story the records actually show. If you found this account useful, subscribing to the channel means more of these documented stories come your way. Every fact in this video comes from verified historical sources, and that's what keeps this channel different from everything else out there. See you in the next one.